Welcome to today's presentation, and this presentation is called The Weaponisation of Language. It's part of the Boxing Evolution PsyOps series, so it's about understanding how psychological manipulation takes place, and in particular today with the weaponisation of language, we're going to be looking at what's known as framing of the narrative. This video has been made with an aim to help raise awareness and educate people around the psychological manipulation tactics that are currently being used by organisations such as the mainstream media in order to create a particular narrative and shape the perception around current events. For the purposes of this video, what is generally being referred to is articles or news clips released by the mainstream media companies, but it can also be applied to any form of communication released by any entity or any person. The way these techniques work is first by inducing a strong emotion about a particular event. Typically, this will be fear or anger, but it can be sadness as well. Often a combination of these emotions too, the more the merrier, which has the effect of making your brain enter into what's known as a fight or flight response, which has the effect of shutting down the thinking part of your brain, which means that you react. The situation will then be framed in such a way that makes it seem to be a bigger problem than it actually is. And this tends to be done by amplifying, stories that are kind of typically quite common around the place, but they'll focus on one particular story and just, bombard you with it day in and night and day. And along with only presenting one viewpoint or side of the story, which lacks nuance. This in turn shapes your perception about the event, which makes you more likely to take action and do things like vote for politicians that are pushing certain policies in relation to those events. The media owners may also have ties to other organisations that want to push a particular product or service that serves as a remedy to said issue. And I'm not going to say anything, but I think we can think of something recently that happened along those lines. The very big problem with this is that it's a form of communication that influences people in their day-to-day lives and can very often lead to massive division and even conflict. If what has been said evokes a strong enough emotional reaction, for this reason, it is extremely important to have an understanding of how language is weaponized and as a collective raise our awareness to see through it, so that we are less able to be manipulated and end up performing actions we later come on to regret. It's important that we understand the full picture before taking any form of action and even forming our opinions. Understanding these methods is also beneficial for ourselves as individuals too when it comes to the realm of self-improvement. On the contrary to weaponized language, there's also what's known as disarming language. And for example, politicians will tend to do this when, for example, one of their peers or themselves are being, facing scrutiny, and people's emotions are running high and they're demanding change. They'll do it as a way to de-escalate the situation. The same tactics will be used to shape people's opinions about individuals that speak contrary to what the preferred narrative or agenda may be. This very often takes the form of what's known as a smear campaign that aims to discredit a person's character and label them as some form of reprehensible character that should not be listened to, rather than address the ideas that they put forth solely on the merits of those ideas. The first and most important thing to understand is that there are generally three main motivations behind any form of article or story released by the media. Number one is an attention-grabbing, curiosity or emotion-evoking headline, which is known as clickbait. This results in more clicks, which then leads to higher page rank and increased ad revenue. The more emotions that can be elicited in the headline, the higher the click-through rate. And I'll put in brackets CTR, so sometimes you might see that written down in places, like click-through rate, CTR. This also makes it more likely for you to pay attention to the rest of the content provided. Number two is an agenda or intention to promote a particular story, angle, or narrative around what is being reported. The agenda is very often politically driven and therefore will tend to be biased towards that organisation's political allegiance. The organisation's political allegiance will often be determined by who the owners of the organisation and often who the workers are, or who their main funding source is. This also applies to who the organisation's business partners are, such as their main source of advertising income, or if shareholders have interest in other areas that they want to have shone in a positive light. Number three is smear campaigns aiming to discredit an opposing idea or rival. For example, are there lobbyists acting on behalf of a particular corporation trying to discredit those who are speaking against a particular product? These are all things that you kind of have to take into account and bear in mind before you kind of read or engage with any form of media and form an opinion or even believe what you're being told. The important thing to understand about language is that it actually programs the mind. The more about how this works can be learned by studying neuro-linguistic programming, or in brackets NLP for short. NLP is a psychological transformation technique used for therapy that was developed by Richard Bandler and John Grinder, who were both professional professors of linguistics. It worked by studying the thought processes of people, in particular those who were successful, and how this affected their behavior, and then using hypnosis combined with specific language to reprogram the mind. The first and most obvious example of how this works is as follows. If I say to you, think of a pink elephant, unless you are pre-warned and prepared that this is what I'm going to say to you, you can't not think of a pink elephant. And this is how it works. Your mind is automatically following what has been said or written, and messages can be getting embedded into the mind subconsciously if you are not aware of what has been done. How effective this tends to be is often generally how compliant you are as a person, but it also operates below the level of conscious awareness, so it's can generally affects the best of us. However, further to the elephant story, what that elephant looks like is going to be unique to each individual based on their own personal association of elephants and the colour pink. And this is another important concept to understand from NLP, that the map is not the territory, the menu is not the meal. What we tend to understand from communication is based on our own experiences and interpretations rather than what is being said. But this also leaves the door open for a wide range of ways for us to be manipulated. So now that I've introduced you to NLP, from an NLP perspective for this video, there are a few main concepts that I need you to understand in order to get your head around how this manipulation works. The first is levels of abstraction. At the lowest level is that of concrete, which then travels up into the more abstract. As we travel up the levels, more and more of the essence of the original subject is left out, which leaves more room for manipulation. As an example, concrete is when we talk about an object directly, such as a book. If I said, take a picture of a book, you would easily know what to do. But if I asked you to go and take a picture of work, you couldn't, because work is an abstract word, which could be related to any number of possibilities, from writing a book to digging a hole to anything else that you could be considered as work. Exactly what that work is has no concrete definition. Using abstract language is very useful when intending to shape perception around certain topics, as it does not involve giving specific concrete details about what is being done. For example, labelling someone a particular thing without elaborating exactly why that is an example of using abstract language to shape perception about someone. The second aspect of NLP that I want you to understand is what's known as presuppositions, which basically means unspoken beliefs. We have presuppositions in regards to how we process information, about how humans behave, communication and learning. In particular, the presuppositions we will be focusing on will be that of communication, around that of the way we communicate affects perception and reception, and in particular that of framing. The important aspect to note from NLP regarding that is this: the one who sets the frame for the communication controls the communicating. When we say the frame, we mean the frame of reference we are using. The thing about framing is that it governs perception, meaning, emotion, behaviour and values. As an example of how you can view something from different frames, take the example of looking at a picture. You can look at it in terms of beauty, you can look at it in terms of what it took to create it, you can look at it in terms of its financial value, or you can look at it in terms of its usefulness. If you take 4 people, with each of them using one of these frames as reference, each of them would have a very different opinion on that picture. The thing about the frame is that it typically is meta, or above the conscious level of perception. The power in setting a frame is that it occurs above the level of consciousness in the recipient. Consequently, people lack awareness of it and therefore cannot bring their conscious values upon it. It is only by becoming aware of the frame and stepping outside of it that you can change your perceptions of an event. So now we're going to talk about the different methods that are used. Each of these methods mentioned can be discussed in a lot more detail and could be, they could be entire videos in themselves. So for this video, I'll just give you a brief overview. I'm also avoiding giving specific examples so as not to get drawn off into tangents or get drawn into different sides of debates, or to be seen to be, taking one particular side, which is not the aim of this. It's just to, the aim of this video is just to raise your awareness in general around tactics that are done by both sides, every side of the spectrum, so that you can form your own well-informed opinions about things. The first of the language manipulation techniques is that of combining opinion with facts, which is also known as inference. This is probably the most simple and easy of all the methods to spot, And the majority of people probably already understand this, but sometimes it can be hard to spot the difference between what is actually just an opinion and what is a fact. But to make things clearer, let's take this example. Fact: Bob is wearing a hat. It's a very nice hat, Bob. That's just my opinion, though. Inference: Bob's hair was a mess, so he put a hat on. Is that the actual reason Bob put a hat on? He might have just been cold, or he might just like how a hat looks on him. So the influence there is kind of stating opinion as fact. And the opinion: Bob looks good in a hat, which is some people's opinion. It's not everyone's opinion. I might look at Bob and think, actually, you look like a twat in that hat, whereas other people might think, wow, you look amazing. So that's what you've kind of got to try and understand the differences there between what's fact, what's inference, and what's opinion. The first step in entangling everything you read or hear or listen to is to completely understand what the full facts are and be aware that there may be some facts missing altogether. The article aims to appear as if the majority consensus opinion on a subject is as they portray. This is aimed at telling you how you should feel and how you should react. Most people tend to go with the opinion of the crowd. For example, you might see a newspaper article or a news clip talking about an event, and they might say something like, "The world mourned," "the world was angry." But in reality, was the whole world angry? Or was the whole world mourning? There might be some people that were happy. There might be some people that were, just indifferent and didn't care. Um, so you've got to note that the frame here is that this is the general consensus of the world. That's the frame that they're making, and that's the frame from which they will tell you the rest of the story. Seeing through inference and learning to be clear about what the actual facts are is the first step in order to avoid being blindly swept up with the crowd. If you're forming your opinion simply based off what you think everyone else's opinion is, then that's when you're most easily led astray. So the second technique that we're going to talk about is twisting the narrative. This involves reframing actions or situations to distort the intention or truth of what actually happened, while simultaneously omitting information from the story to not provide the full context of what happened. In video media, this often involves editing and cutting out parts of the video to remove the context. And I've put in brackets here, the context means the surrounding information or the bigger or the full picture. Third is redefining the meaning of words, and that also means redefining it to include things that were previously not associated with that definition, and then labeling anyone who falls into that category as that definition, with the old definition typically not having good connotations. This is a problem because behaviour that has generally been very normal can suddenly become something people can be vilified without them even realising it. This also includes using definitions to label certain things which actually do not fall within that definition. And the problem with this is it detracts from the actual instances where the definition is real or when a certain activity has taken place and it is the genuine definition of something bad, and you're now labelling something new that probably is quite harmless as that definition too. And now suddenly, when people are actually talking about a real instance that isn't good, they've heard certain definitions used so much that they've just been desensitized to it. Next up is using emotive words, and I've used an example of words such as heartbroken or shiver. The more emotive the word that they use, the more it kind of enables you to visualize and feel and creates that a picture in your head. So if you're wanting someone to feel really strong, negative emotions, the more emotive the words, descriptive the words that they use, the more powerful it is what they're telling you or what they write. Now, this one is a particularly sneaky one, and one that you really kind of have to, be on the ball with, because it can really trick you if you're not careful. And so it comes under the category of wordplay and semantics. An example I've got here is made with 100% chicken. Now, there's a very well-known chicken company that has used the terms made with 100% chicken instead of using the words made of 100% chicken. Very, very small minor detail with of, but if they had used the words of, it would open up the door to a whole range of legal and moral, all kinds of other implications basically. So, just by changing that one word, they get around not having their chicken completely made of chicken and having other things. So this is one sneaky little trick that you really want to keep your eye out for. Now, this is a particularly common one, and we're seeing it more and more now, and that is labeling people as certain things and then using that label as a complete definition of someone's character and basically using that to discredit them. And also, as mentioned previously, redefining certain actions, meaning that you are that certain label, and it basically means that once they say you're that label, you can't be listened to. Nothing you say should be taken seriously. And if you think back recently over the past few years, the amount of different labels have been applied to certain people for either doing certain things or even not doing certain things. I think it's very important that we have to see through the use of labeling and try and kind of see nuance in situations. And again, relative to the last slide, this also tends to go hand in hand with labeling, and that is conflating. And this often takes the place of conflating several different things all under the heading of one definition or label, or associating different things as being part of that label or definition. And again, I want to use the word nuance, okay, and also trying to understand that whilst there might be associations between certain things, that just because someone's interested in one thing or does one thing, that another person who does another thing might be interested or do, doesn't necessarily mean that the two are explicitly interlinked. And so keeping your eye open for conflating of things is another key point in order to see through the manipulation. Now, this again comes back to kind of, it's similar to using the motive words, but it's a little more subtle than that. But you can either use gentle words to describe aggressive actions or, activities that might actually be quite violent or might, just not be that nice. And vice versa, you might use words that are, quite hard and aggressive to, reframe actions that are actually quite gentle. As being negative. So looking at just the names of things and why and thinking why are they called those things, and actually looking at rather than the name of a certain thing, what does that entity or thing actually do? What are the actual actions being performed? Will help you kind of see through a lot of this. This is something that is fairly new in terms of it being done, but that is actually equating words with violence or being a direct precursor to violence. Um, it's not a great thing because it basically, in many people's minds, it gives them the justification that if a certain person says certain things, that they are being violent, and it gives them in their mind the right to be actually violent. And also, if they're portraying that on the news and the media as a certain person saying certain things, outside of, for example, actually telling people to go and be violent, which is known as inciting, it really heightens tensions with certain topics. On the other side of things as well, when people think that words are violence or a precursor to violence, it keeps them in a state of anxiety and a state of fear, because that there's been a lot of things about things in the gym. For example, people have spoken about how people come and speak to them in the gym, all that kind of thing, even look at them in the gym, and that means that they might be attacked. But that is not a healthy mindset to have. And you have to kind of really learn the actual signs of what is violent and what's going to lead to violence, rather than just living in a state of anxiety, because otherwise you're just going to end up staying in your house and never coming out, and that's not a good way to live at all. Now, this is one that we actually saw a lot of over the past couple of years, and that is using claimed experts as the ultimate authority on the subject. And basically, when they put the expert up there, they're basically saying you should accept what has been said, even if it doesn't make sense. And when this is done, there's rarely any information about any conflicts of interest around what organisations they may be involved with and what their motivations are. Who they being funded by, what's their motives, and it uses that appeal to authority, basically saying you can't think for yourself. This person is an expert. Anything you see, think or feel around a subject, just ignore it, because what the expert is telling you that is how it is, and if anything, feel shame that you even dare question someone much more higher up and knowledgeable than you. Now, I've got these next two on the same slide because although they're slightly different, they kind of tend to link in an interesting way. So the first one is defining subjective perception as objective truth. For example, you might say that you're unsafe, that you're objectively unsafe just because you feel uncomfortable in a certain situation. But the important thing regarding this is to understand, again, going back to the NLP aspect that I told you before, the map is not the territory. So what you're experiencing internally doesn't actually have any relation necessarily to what is on the outside. And part of NLP in the improvement process is learning to separate out and understand the difference between your internal experience versus objective reality, in terms of what you're capable of. For example, if you're feeling anxiety ahead of a boxing match and you're visualizing it going a certain way, you're more than likely to make it go a certain way. Self-fulfilling prophecy. And then the other one is gaslighting, and that's basically turning around to someone and saying, no, this did not happen, it's not how you see it. Now the reason these two I've linked in together is because an interesting topic to think about is, where does subjective experience end and gaslighting begin? But for me to explain it to you, generally gaslighting will involve invalidating your experience without providing any additional reasonable facts or context, and will not allow for sensible questions to be asked with reasonable explanations provided to those answers. On the inverse, if someone tells you something but then gets upset when you apply logic to the situation or tries to ask questions, it's a sign that they're not being fully upfront about why they're saying what they're saying, or that they're lying or have something to hide. And the reason that I have those two linked in together is because, for example, some people might state something. They might state that this is how they feel about something, or state that something happened and something happened for X reason. And then when you say to them, no, actually, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? They'll turn around and say, oh no, you're just gaslighting me. You're gaslighting me. And that's why it's important to kind of have clear mental understandings about the difference between someone who's actually trying to gaslight you and someone who's not. And also, even in your own internal world, being able to understand what objective reality is and what is just your perception based on your beliefs about how something should be, or how you think something should be. And often, a lot of the time, we block things out, or we refuse to accept things simply based on the fact that we don't like the feel of how the truth is. And a big key to personal development is working in this area. Next one is insinuation, or claimed insinuation. This is hinting but not directly saying something, or claiming insinuation. So for example, someone says, what you're saying is, you tell someone something and they say, oh, so what you're saying is X, or what you're saying is Y, when that's not what you're saying at all. And there was a very famous interview with Jordan Peterson and Kathy Newman, and she basically just tried to misinterpret and insinuate that everything Jordan said was meaning something completely different to what he was saying. So this is one to look out for. And basically, if people try doing it to you as well, it's very important to remain calm and just bring it back and reiterate the point that you were making. But also look for it on the news as well, or the media, or any form of media, or anything that anyone tells you. Try and look and see what the actual message of the story is the person saying, rather than how they're trying to twist it. And again, linked into insinuation is also assumptions. People just assuming that someone did a certain action for a certain reason, or certain things happened, for a certain reason, when they really don't actually have the full facts. And the problem with assumptions is we often tend to bring our own negative bias and projections into that. So, for example, we might not like someone, and we, for whatever reason, and we see something happens, they might get arrested or something else happens, and we then project our own assumptions onto that. Oh, they must be guilty because I don't like them, but you're not actually realizing that in yourself. So assumptions are a very big one, and you also have to look and realize when assumptions are being made. Now this is starting to go into the more kind of complicated and more darker aspect, the more subconscious side of things, and that is repeating keywords or phrases to embed that thought in the person's mind, and it comes under the subliminal hypnosis aspect. In particular, with I'll give you a very obvious example, and that was with weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and it's been quite clearly shown now that there was no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, but we had it repeated to us day in, day out, every day. Terrorism, weapons of mass destruction. It was literally mentioned multiple times in every speech that every person on the news or any politician mentioned it. So that you just heard it so much to the point where you just accepted it as truth. And anytime that you see certain words or key phrases being repeated, that's when you have to really recognize that actually this has been done in an effort to manipulate you. Ridicule, discrediting, and shaming language. Anyone that tends to have an opposing narrative or opposing facts, or tends to stand up against what the general main narrative that's been portrayed is, you'll see that they tend to be ridiculed, discredited, and also shaming language and guilt tripping language, basically saying if you don't do this, you're a bad person. If you don't do this, you should feel bad. You should feel ashamed of yourself. And this is one of the biggest psychological control techniques, because no one wants to feel shame, no one wants to feel guilty, and no one wants to feel ostracized from the tribe or society. And again, this kind of links in hand with the point I made earlier about inference, and where they tell you what the general consensus is. So, for example, they'll tell you that the world or everyone feels a certain way, and that everyone is doing a certain thing because they all feel this way, and that if you don't do what everyone else is doing, then you should be ashamed of yourself. And you're a very bad person. And this is, where fear really kind of plays its part in manipulating the brain and getting you to do things that you wouldn't otherwise do. Logical fallacies. This kind of tends to come up more in a debating aspect than being told, certain information. But again, it kind of links into the inference aspect, or the assumptions aspect. Things such as straw man arguments, that kind of thing. There's more on logical fallacies to learn, but it's just something that you should have a look at and understand, in order to kind of really understand how certain things can be twisted and made to look different to what they actually are. And we can't forget, out of all of these things that I've mentioned, complete flat out lying. It is probably one of the biggest ones. It's something that media organisations have to be careful of, because it makes them liable. But also at the same time, we are just told flat out lies so many times, and far too many people get away with it. So that's the last of the techniques. Just try and realise when you're being lied to. So now we're going to talk about the defense tactics, your mental defense tactics around, seeing through and not getting drawn into what you're being told. The first one, and the most easiest one, is to look at the actions instead of the words. What is actually happening? Don't necessarily accept that what you're being told is what's happening. Do some investigation yourself and look at what's actually, what are the actual actions. Also look at the facts. A lot of people just kind of get told X person is bad because of Y, whatever. But then, what are the actual facts surrounding the situation, or, how much do you actually know about what is going on? And this is a big one. Ask questions. Always seek the full context, before forming your opinion. And it's often not a popular thing to do, or something we all like to do, and that is research the information from both sides of the debate before reaching your conclusion. In particular, if someone is telling you something, seek clarification on the definitions and meanings behind what's been said. When someone says, for example, a label, or says a certain word, say, what do you mean by that? What's your actual definition of this before we continue to talk about it? Consider that will be there may be underlying motivations that are not being revealed as to why being what is said is being said. For example, is there an element of jealousy behind why someone is saying something, or is it propaganda? Do they have an agenda behind what they're telling you? Is it, are they trying to manipulate you into a certain action? Um, Another one as well is there an element of attention seeking, or just trying to create drama, or is it an attempted justification for something bad that has been done by painting the other person as bad instead? So for example, you do something to someone, and then so that people don't turn around to you and say, oh, you're out of order for doing that. You then say, oh, well, they've done X, Y, Z, therefore I'm justified in doing what I did to them. But really, they haven't actually done anything. So that's a very, very sneaky one. And by doing that, they're making themselves out to be the victim. And this is something you need to understand. Are they trying to get revenge or bring down a rival? Are they someone that just likes drama? And this is related to the attention seeking aspect. Not everyone that says things, not claims things, is doing it out of integrity. Sometimes they just want attention, and they like drama because when drama's happening, you're involved in the center of it. Learn to separate the opinion from the facts. A lot of people make their opinions based upon what they think the majority opinion is, or and I mentioned this in the beginning, what the major consensus is. People like to go with the herd, and even if they know the truth is different, they're still too scared to speak up on what they think. Also, look at what is not being reported and even what is censored altogether. When things get censored, that's often a big indication that there's truth to what's been said, because they don't want you to hear it. Assess the evidence or the lack of it. And last of all, this is kind of contrary to the evidence, but trust your intuition. Your subconscious brain, your subconscious mind will pick up on inconsistencies and incongruences far quicker than your conscious mind will. Often you'll have a little voice in the back of your head that says something isn't right here. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're right about what you're thinking, but this is your indication, your signal to start investigating more and look for the evidence. So your intuition needs to work. Often we've had an idea that someone is up to no good, but we have no proof of it. Now, just because we have no proof doesn't mean that what's been said, what I've just said, isn't happening. But what we need to do is think, actually, my mind, my subconscious brain is picking up on this fact. I need to investigate further and be wary. Final tips in regards to not getting drawn into the things that we're being told instantly. Here's some final tips. We don't have the time to be fact checking everything all the time. It's time consuming. So to a certain extent, we have to kind of take things that we're told or shown in the media at face value. So in order to kind of do the best we can, the first thing to know is, if something makes you feel a strong emotion, learn to take a step back. This is, rather than acting on impulse, we're just saying, okay, I feel pissed off, I feel angry, I feel scared about what I've just seen, but I'm aware of that emotion, and I'm going to just take a step back from it for the moment and give myself time to calm down and think clearly again. Because remember what I said in the beginning, it induces that fight or flight response, and that shuts down the thinking part of our brain, and that makes it difficult for us to think. So that's the first tip: take a step back. Next, if you really feel so compelled by what you've seen, that you're upset or you're scared, whatever, and you feel like you want to take action, research it further. Do your own investigation, your own investigative work. But bear in mind that certain search engines and things like that, they filter out certain information. So there's other search tools that you can use, and there's other platforms that you can use, which I'm not going to go into right now. But just take your time to fully research the subject. And this is a key thing to learn to do in life next, not just in relation to media, but just anything that upsets you in general. Learn to respond instead of react. Okay, in one, you're acting on an impulse, boom, you're straight in, you're not thinking. When you respond, you've taken your time and you're coming from a calm, assertive position. In particular with this kind of information and things that we're being told, especially smear campaigns, we have to be careful before we start dehumanizing people. as anyone who studied history, World War II, Nazi regime, and many other evil regimes previous to that, many of the greatest dark events in history have occurred, often start with dehumanizing language. Something else to bear in mind is the media does not reflect reality, it creates it, and it does it in order to get you to adhere to their agenda. It wants to control you. And it spins extremely complex and compelling illusions, and it's, you know, one of the aims of this video is to kind of free yourself from the video, learn to take a step back, you know, not get suckered in. And it's almost like, you know, once your awareness is raised, you start watching things and you start seeing things in a completely different awareness, a completely different light, and you start to see through what's really going on. And it, you know, it really does open your eyes to so much that goes on in the world. Don't just take my word for what has been told to you today. Some very interesting points to research further: Sigmund Freud, the power of the unconscious mind, and in particular Edward Bernays, who was Freud's nephew, and he used these concepts in advertising. I think a very interesting story is of how diamonds were first marketed and made to become some elaborate, expensive gift for women. That's a very interesting story. Another guy to research is Walter Lippmann, and he talks a lot about manipulating the public mood with suggestion, all using techniques that I've mentioned in this video. And also a CIA project, which is very well known, but maybe not so well known to everyone, and that's Project Mockingbird. So go and research all of these, and you know, you'll see that what I'm talking about isn't just some pseudoscience. I can't pronounce it. Pseudoscience. It's actually very real and very effective techniques that can be used to achieve very nefarious goals. Also, if you're interested in NLP, and this is an amazing tool for self-transformation and achieving success, please check out this amazing book, which is what got me into NLP in the first place, and it's called The User's Manual for the Brain. This book is actually a lot more than just about recognizing how media organizations try to manipulate you. As I just said, it's an amazing tool for self-development and achieving your full potential. NLP is an extremely useful tool for reprogramming your own mind to overcome things such as limiting self-beliefs, and even for things such as becoming better at sales. If you would like to get a copy, please feel free to use my affiliate link, and it will be in the description of this video. And honestly, it's probably one of the best books that you could buy. So if you would like any further coaching or help with, you know, when it comes to changing your mind psychologically, transforming yourself, anything we do when it comes to self-improvement begins in the mind. Please feel free to get in touch with me via my website. It's boxingevolution.com. I've been a coach for 15 years now, coaching physically, mentally and emotionally people to achieve their full potential. So if you'd like some more help, please get in contact that way. Last of all, if you've enjoyed this video, please share it out and you know, share the love. And also please give us a follow on any of the socials. You can see them there: Facebook, Boxing Evolution Gym. Check us out on YouTube, youtube.com/Boxing Evolution. WhatsApp is available via DM if you really would like to have a more in-depth conversation. Twitter is @Boxing Evolution, and Instagram is @Boxing Evolution as well.